congrats on Young Werther.
Thank you.
I thought it was great, and I love your character, Charlotte. I can see why, Werther himself, falls head over heels for her, and she's just very charming. I don't see why Patrick's character is such a dud about his relationship, but what nerve. Um, but yeah, I mean, I was curious if in preparing for Charlotte, did you read or reread the original source material, or did you decide that it was maybe better to sort of distance and create your own thing for the movie?
In this case, it's sort of case by case if you have source material or research that you can do. In this case, because Jose had written such a different take on the original, and because the original is full of thoughts that Werther has that Charlotte might not necessarily know, being that it's this epistolary novel from 250 years ago. It felt easier to sort of think about the tone of it from this particular point of view of Jose's take on it, of Toronto, now instead of Germany hundreds of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense, of course. And yeah, you have some great scenes with Douglas and with Patrick, of course. Were you a fan of Suits? I know there's been such a resurgence. Had you watched it back in the day?
I watched it. I probably started watching it after, the third season had come out because all of these Toronto expats found it to be deeply satisfying
Oh,
to
okay.
watch the show with all of its very poorly hidden Toronto-ness. So there was a great deal of like, if you're feeling homesick, you can watch this show that is very much Toronto streets with a wonderful cast. And I really did. I loved that show
Yeah.
very much. And
Yeah.
and happy to see its like recent, kind of resurgence and success again.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, and like I said, I love your character Charlotte, and she's so, I mean, she's irresistible. I mean, and yeah, those that chemistry, with Douglas on screen. Is there a secret besides just words on the page and bringing them to life? Is there a secret for you to I mean, to making Charlotte such a lovable. I mean, she's in this tough situation, of course, but is there a secret to making her just? I think everyone's gonna fall in love with Charlotte when the rest of the world sees this movie. So
I think the secret to so much of it is the wonderful dialogue that Jose wrote.
yeah,
And the other wonderful thing in terms of Doug, Jose, and I were able to do just some Zoom rehearsals early on before we all arrived in Toronto. And then in terms of a sort of team building exercise, the best thing in the world was having to take waltz lessons for the first week to figure out the waltz and the dialogue in the midst of this. These are two people who, really know how to waltz. So in the midst of this sort of funny, choreography session, as well as adding in dialogue, there's nothing like it in terms of building a kind of physical and then literal vocabulary amongst your leads. So highly recommend if you're shooting a romantic comedy to start with waltz lessons.
yeah, that's so. I forgot about all those wonderful scenes, with the dancing and whatnot. That's yeah. It's sort of like you see the actors like talking while riding a horse, but
Exactly right.
I feel like waltzing is would probably be more difficult than that. So
Yeah, it's sort of you're out of your element enough. We were both out of our element enough to allow for the vulnerability that I think is the key to any sort of chemistry. And Doug was so wonderful and such a kind-hearted and seriously professional guy that we would just able to rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and sit in Toronto parks and rehearse and run through lines and all of these things so that by the time we got to set, it all felt effortless.
right, right. Well, yeah, that's great. It did look effortless, at the end result. So hats off to you. So wonderful movie, and yeah, those scenes are great. I also wanted to mention I'm a huge Scott Pilgrim fan. I read all the graphic novels. I can't believe it's been almost 15 years since the wonderful movie came out, and Kim's one of my favorite characters.
The
uh,
best.
yeah, it's like, what's your name? Kim. You know, play drums? Yes. I mean, endlessly quotable. And then of course there was that series. I loved the Netflix series, and I was curious if for you what it was like to reunite with the cast for this series, and if you knew it was just going to be the recent series and then be done, or if anyone like the creator Brian or anyone has hinted at being if there's going to be anything more down the line.
I haven't heard about anything more recently. We have this email chain with all of our cast on it, which is how the anime series kind of came together. Is it's just an easy ask with everyone, Brandon, Michael, Jason, Chris, Aubrey, like everybody's on this on this chain. And
Nice.
it is one of my favorite groups to be talking to. So it's because of our love for one another and our love for the film and for what the film has kind of continued to be over the years. I think we're all always happy to revisit, and I was so happy that Brian got to kind of extend um and adapt a new kind of feeling to the graphic novels in the series. And I thought it was so weird and so funny, and kept the tone, but sort of provided an extension, and I loved it. So would happily, if there's ever another iteration, I think it's we're all kind of around for it.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope so. But I mean, what's come out so far has been so wonderful, and I can't wait to rewatch it and reread and all that. So yeah, that's great. That's nice to hear. And I also wanted to ask. I mean, I also loved your character, Dr. Agnes, on Star Trek Picard, and I think I was reading somewhere it sounded like maybe the showrunners had a plan to like bring your character back for the season 3 finale, and I was just curious, like, hearing from you, like, did were you hoping to come back, or like were you asked, and is it I just
I I remember those discussions early on, and then I think as the scripts were written, they realized it was just too full. So nobody ever kind of revisited bringing, Girardi back for anything else. But I loved playing her. I loved being part of that crew, and I loved being on the La Serena.
Of course. Yeah. And going back to Young Werther, I mean, there are a lot of like laugh out loud moments, you have with Charlotte has with Werther, but then there are those, really raw and, vulnerable scenes where you guys are kind of spilling your hearts. And like I said, you have you're in this tough situation, Charlotte. So for you, I mean, what do you think had the most, in the moment, the scenes that you enjoyed doing the most? I mean, did you enjoy the comedic, the more like slapstick moments running around town with Werther? Was it, I think, did it leave more of an impression on you doing those, more emotionally intense scenes with him? And
I think the beauty of the film and the way we made it is that none of it can exist without the other, in the way that the the chemistry that exists can't be there without the vulnerability that kind of openness requires. And so part of that openness is running around and being goofy and silly and getting caught up in the moment. And then at the same time, that openness is required to bare your heart to another person. And that's why I think the movie is so successful in terms of telling a love story. Is love stories aren't just one thing. They require this curiosity about another person that just by definition means you are open to both the joy and the heartache.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I think that's great. And like I said, I can't wait for everyone else to see it. So congratulations again. And it was very nice to meet you, Allison.
Yes, you as well. Thank you so much.